Okay, good day, class. So today we'll be discussing the theories of learning under behaviorism, and at the end of our discussion, we will explain the concepts of theories of learning under Pavlov, and then for next week, we will be discussing the theories of learning of Thorndike, B.F. Skinner, Tolman, and Bandura. And then after that, we will create a simple plan applying these theories of learning in facilitation of learning. But before we proceed with our discussion, let's try to look at this advanced answer. Actually, the theories of learning uh, is divided into two as per our discussion. The first one is under the behaviorism, and then the second one is under the cognitivism. So yung mga behavioral theories na to, it implies that as teachers, we ought to arrange environmental conditions so that our students respond properly to presented stimuli. And under the cognitive theories naman, this emphasize making knowledge meaningful and helping our learners organize and relate new information to existing knowledge in their memory. So what's the difference between the two? Kapag cognitivism, this theory focus on internal mental processes that affect how our learner feels and behave. On the other hand, the behaviorism naman, yung mga theories under behaviorism, it concentrates on how our learners learn through their interaction with the environment, and it is based on the idea that all behaviors are acquired through conditioning, which is a process of reinforcement and punishment. So again, here are the theories of learning under the behaviorism, and let's try to discuss Pavlov's classical conditioning. Okay. Classical conditioning, class, is a psychological concept that has been widely used to explain how humans or even animals learn to associate different stimuli. And the pioneer in this field was Ivan Pavlov. He is a Russian physiologist who conducted a series of experiments on dogs in the late 19th century. And Pavlov's finding revolutionized in the field of psychology, and he received so many awards, and even today his work on classical conditioning is still being studied. So what is classical conditioning, class? Classical conditioning is a learning process that occurs through association between an environmental stimulus and a naturally occurring stimulus. It had a major influence on behaviorism, which is based on the assumption that learning occurs, class, no, again, learning occurs through interaction with the environment. Actually, it also a process in which a neutral stimulus, which is not associated with any specific natural response, on pairing with the natural stimulus, acquires the characteristics of the natural stimulus. So in simplest term, under classical conditioning, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or in an animal. You remember John Watson, di ba? Si John Watson, he proposed that the process of classical conditioning based on Pavlov's observation was able to explain all aspects of human psychology. Di ba sabi nga ni Watson, give me a dozen of healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at a random and train them to become any type of specialist. Parang bigyan mo ko ng isang 1 dozen healthy infant, then I'll make them a doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chef, and even beggar and thief, no, regardless of his talents, regardless of their tendencies, their abilities, vocation, and the race of his ancestors, because Watson believed that all individual differences in behavior were due to different learning experiences. Okay, so what are the component of the classical conditioning before we move on to the discussion of on how classical conditioning works? The first one is the unconditioned stimulus. This is a stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response. It is a stimulus that uh, again automatically and triggers a response. Later on, we will discuss further the differences of these four components. The next one is the unconditioned response. These are the unlearned response that occurs naturally in response to the unconditioned stimulus. The third one is the conditioned stimulus. This is a previously neutral stimulus that when paired with an unconditioned stimulus, it triggers as a conditioned response. And the last one is yung tinatawag nating conditioned response, which is the learned response to the previously neutral stimulus. Okay? Okay, so for us to be able to understand more the components of the classical conditioning, again, the unconditioned stimulus is the stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers as a response, like this one, the food of the dog. The unconditioned response, this is the unlearned response that occurs naturally in response to the unconditioned stimulus. Ito yung pagsasalivate ng dog. Di ba? Whenever the dog saw a food, nagsasalivate siya. Okay? Next, the conditioned stimulus, which is the previously neutral stimulus that when paired with unconditioned stimulus, it triggers a conditioned response. Okay? And the last one is the conditioned response. The conditioned response, which is the learned response to the previously neutral stimulus. So let's try to look at this illustration. So there are three stages of classical conditioning. Ikita natin sa ating uh, presentation. And at each stage class, the stimuli are responses are given special specific terms. So let's try to look at this stage one, before conditioning. So in this stage, the unconditioned stimulus produces an unconditioned response in an organism. In basic term, this means that a stimulus in the environment has produced a behavior or a response that is unlearned. For example, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, whenever a dog sees a food, di ba? Unconditioned din yung response niya, nagsasalivate siya. And therefore, class, it is a natural response that has not yet been taught, and in this respect, no new behavior has been learned. Okay? Okay, for example, aside from this illustration, yung stomach virus, it would create a response of nausea, di ba? Another example is that when gumamit tayo ng perfume, it could create a response of happiness or desire. So this stage, itong stage 1 na to, it also involves another stimulus that has no effect on a person and is called the neutral stimulus. This one, this is the bell. So the neutral stimulus could be a person, could be an object, could be a place, and the like. And in here, the neutral stimulus is a ring of a bell. Okay? And the neutral stimulus in the classical conditioning does not produce a response. As we can see in the illustration, there is no response coming from the dog until it is paired with the unconditioned stimulus. Okay? So let's proceed to the stage 2 or during the conditioning. So during this stage, a stimulus which produces no response is associated with the unconditioned stimulus, at which point it now becomes known as the conditioned stimulus. For example, in here, kanina yung bell, this was a neutral stimulus kasi kapag whenever the dog hears the ring of the bell, wala siyang response. But kapag pinair siya sa food, okay, pinaring ang bell and then pinair siya doon sa dog food, nagkakaroon ng unconditioned response yung dog, which is yung nagsasalivate siya. Another example yung kanina, for example, sa stomach virus, di ba? Ah, ang unconditioned response do'n is, nagsusuka tayo and it might be associated with eating the certain food such as chocolate. And chocolate, is now then the conditioned stimulus. For example also sa perfume, 'di ba, which is yung unconditioned stimulus kanina, it might be associated with a specific person, which is now the conditioned stimulus. Kaya whenever, naaamoy natin yung certain scent ng isang perfume, kilala natin kung sino yung taong paparating. Okay? So for classical conditioning class, to be effective, let's all remember that the conditioned stimulus should occur before the unconditioned stimulus rather than after it or during the same. So, the conditioned stimulus acts as a type of signal or cue for the unconditioned stimulus. And often during this stage class, the unconditioned stimulus must be associated with the conditioned stimulus on a number of occasions or trials for learning to take place. Okay? And last class, sa stage 3 or after the conditioning, as we can see, no, the conditioned stimulus has been associated with the unconditioned stimulus to create a new conditioned response. Okay? So before conditioning, when the dog hears the spell, there was no response coming from the dog. But during the conditioning and after the conditioning, since during the conditioning the bell was paired with the food for the dog to produce unconditioned response, such as to salivate. After the conditioning, whenever the dog hears the bell, may conditioned response na siya na nagsasalivate na siya because he's familiar with the ringing of the bell and whenever he hears the bell, na-associate niya yon na may food nang paparating. Okay? So again, for example, a person who has been associated with nice perfume is now found attractive. Okay? And also, yung chocolate which was eaten before a person was sick with the virus now produces a response of nausea. Okay? And actually, class, this illustration here in our presentation is the most famous example of classical conditioning of Ivan Pavlov's with his experiment with dogs. Okay? Who salivated in response to a bell tone. Kasi Pavlov showed here that when a bell was sounded each time, the dog was fed and the dog learned to associate the sound with the presentation of the food. Okay, so during the stage 1 or before conditioning, he first presented the dogs with the sound of a bell. The dog did not salivate, so this was again neutral stimulus. Then he presented the sound of a bell with the food, and the dog salivated. So the food was an unconditioned stimulus, and salivation was an unconditioned response. Now, Pavlov repeatedly presented the dogs with the sound of the bell first, and then the food, wherein pinag-pair niya yung bell and the food. And after a few repetition, the dog salivated when they heard, when the dog heard the sound of the bell, and the bell had become the conditioned stimulus, and salivation had become the conditioned response. Okay. Okay. So what is its implication in a classroom setting? Okay. So let's try to look at this picture. So ang stimulus shall be provided by us, teachers, okay? And then yung response by the learner. And in order for learning to take place or in order for a behavior to change, there must be a reinforcement provided by us, by the instructor. So when we say stimulus, it is a thing or event that evokes specific reaction in an organ or organism. And when we say response, it is a reaction as that of an organism or mechanism to a specific stimulus. So in a classroom setting class, classical conditioning can be used to reinforce positive behaviors and attitudes towards learning. For example, a teacher can use praise, which is a positive stimulus, to reinforce a student's participation in class. which is a natural response. Kaya mahalaga yung praise, yung pinupuri natin yung ating mga estudyante. Okay? Because over time, the student will learn to associate participation in class with positive feedback and will be more likely to engage in future classes. Okay? Another application of classical conditioning in the classroom is the use of reward systems. For example, as teachers can offer students a small reward such as stickers, such as chocolate, or a piece of candy for completing their homework on time. And over time, students will learn to associate completing their work with the reward, and they will be more likely to complete their homework in the future. Okay. Another thing is that in order for us teachers to ensure students discipline is to enforce a practice such as, for example, three clap technique, 1, 2, 3. No, whenever we clap thrice and the class falls silent, for example, if the student violates the rule, they can be punished with a timeout or extra homework. And of course, class, no one likes extra homework no during your junior high school years. So the students will become more alert and quieter now as soon as they hear us clapping 3 times. No, okay. So this classical conditioning class is this actually help us to establish classroom routines and foster classroom management. Okay? Another thing, class, it could also be a source of for us to get the attention of our learners, no, as attention getters, such as, for example, turning off the lights, rhyming, student callbacks, hand signals, okay, a bell, music, or when the teacher simply stops talking, it could be used to obtain students' attention. For example, when we may say class, 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 and the class is expected to call back, yes, 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 and then they wait for the teacher's next direction, and modeling this behavior will be crucial to the beginning conditioning processes. And as we can see now, classical conditioning of Ivan Pavlov is very useful in many ways for us, no, teachers and students, because by applying such techniques in the classroom, we will be able to improve classroom instruction, classroom routine, classroom management, together with the behavior management to a great level. Okay? Okay, so let's try to discuss the principles of classical conditioning. The first one is acquisition, and this is the initial stage of learning when a response is first established and gradually strengthened. Okay, for example, from the word itself, initial stage. So before conditioning, nag-i-instruct ka sa class to quiet down, and the class will get quiet. Okay? And then, i-prepared natin siya doon sa gesture natin na clap 3 times. 1, 2, 3. At first, no, class, yung mga students, when they hear the 3 claps, they will not get quiet. No? But as soon as we establish the association between your instruction to quiet down and clap 3 times, the students will now be quiet. And that is acquisition, the initial stage of learning. Okay? The next one, class, is the extinction. This occurs when the condition response decreases or disappears. And in classical conditioning, this happens when a conditioned stimulus is no longer paired with an unconditioned stimulus. For example, ah, kapag nag-i-instruct ka sa class na mag-quiet sila, wala ng 3 times clap, okay? Nangyayari yung extinction kasi nawawala na yung association or yung condition responses between yung instruction natin to say, let's say, quiet, for example, and yung clapping of 3 hands. Okay, that is extinction. Okay. So sometimes, yung mga learned responses na yan, it can be suddenly re-emerge even after a period of extinction. And that is spontaneous recovery. Ito yung reappearance of the conditioned response after a rest or period of lesson responses. Okay? So kung nawala kanina yung association between yung instruction mo to the class to be quiet, tas nawala yung clapping of three hands, no, pwede naman siyang ma-recover by means of spontaneous recovery. Basta i-associate lang ulit natin yung ating instruction and yung, for example, yung three claps natin. Okay? Next. And the last one, class, is yung stimulus generalization. Actually, hindi pa pala to last, pang-apat. This is the tendency for the conditioned stimulus to evoke similar responses after the response have been conditioned. For example, aside from three claps na na-associate natin doon sa instruction na be quiet, minsan one clap na lang, hands up, and then nagkakaroon na establish yung association doon na whenever yung teacher nag-hands up, nag-clap, na ibig sabihin, kailangan nilang tumahimik. Okay? Okay, and the last one is stimulus discrimination. This is the ability to differentiate between a conditioned stimulus and other stimuli that have not been paired with an unconditioned stimulus. For example, kanina di ba sinabi natin doon sa acquisition, whenever the teacher instruct the class to get quiet, pinipare niya yon with three claps, 1, 2, 3, okay, and then after that, mako-condition or ma-associate na yung dalawang stimulus na yun and then yung mga students, tatahimik na sila. And under this stimulus discrimination, ito yung na-differentiate nila between a conditioned stimulus and other stimuli that have not been paired with an unconditioned stimulus. For example, sa tatlong clap, nagre-respond sila at whenever they hear three claps, ang ibig sabihin nun for them is to get quiet. Tapos nagkakaroon sila ng differentiation doon kapag sa sumisigaw si teacher kasi yung shouting, hindi nila na-associate yon or hindi na-condition yon on that particular stimulus. Okay? Okay, ano pa yung mga classroom implications ng classical conditioning under Pavlov na pwede nating magamit sa classroom routines, management, behavior management kapag mga nasa field na tayo. For example, before conditioning, whenever we count down from 20, the students will not clean up. Okay? Tapos i-pair natin siya doon sa instruction natin na kailangan maglinis sila whenever naririnig nila tayo na bumibilang ng 1 to 20. So during during the conditioning, no, as teacher, we tell the class to clean up and sinasabay natin yun sa pagbilang natin from 1 to 20. And then eventually, no, nag-clean up yung mga students. So after the conditioning, kapag bumibilang tayo ng 1 to 20, kahit wala na yung instruction, automatically, na-associate na yung nung bata, yung stimulus na yon and then they will clean up na. Okay? Another thing is that, for example, before conditioning, no, we instruct our students to quiet down. Of course, our students will quiet down. And then we associate this instruction to clap 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Okay, at first, kapag pumalakpak tayo ng tatlo, yung mga learners na yan, they will not get quiet. Okay, so during the conditioning, we clap 3 times, and then we instruct our class to quiet down. And of course, nako-condition na yung mga bata to get quiet. So after conditioning, after we clap 3 times, tumatahimik na yung mga bata without further instruction. Okay? Okay, class. So that's all for Pavlov's classical conditioning. Again, until next week, we will be discussing theories of learning under behaviorism. So by next week, we will be discussing Thorndike's connectionism, Skinner's operant conditioning, Tolman's purposive behaviorism, and Bandura's social learning theory. And for week 7 and 8, ang discussion naman natin will revolve around cognitivism. Okay, so I will give you enough time to review, and then after 10 minutes, we will have our quiz via Google Form. Okay, thank you.